The field was quiet except for the soft rustle of wind through the grass. He hadn't set foot here in decades, yet his dog bounded forward as if it knew the way. Each step felt heavier, the fading light draping the world in hues of gold and shadow. The air smelled of rain-soaked soil and wild clover, familiar scents that stirred ghosts of summers long gone. Suddenly, the dog stopped. It stood over a patch of earth, tail low, eyes fixed on him as if urging him closer. His heart pounded as he knelt, hands trembling, pushing away the soil until metal scraped against his fingertips. A rusted box emerged, its surface etched by time. He forced it open and stared. Inside was a photograph of him and his father, dated years after his father had died. The field stretched endlessly before him, an ocean of gold and green swaying beneath the dying light of day. It was the kind of place that seemed untouched by time, a patch of the world forgotten by progress. He hadn't seen it since boyhood, back when he'd spent summers here barefoot and sunburned, racing through the grass as his father's laughter carried over the wind. Now it felt different, older, wilder. The grass was taller than he remembered, dense and overgrown, brushing against his jeans as he followed the streak of white fur bounding ahead of him. "Jasper," he muttered between breaths, but the dog didn't slow. The scent of rain-soaked earth clung to the air, mingling with the sweetness of wildflowers. The field hummed with quiet life, the chirr of crickets, the flutter of unseen wings, the whisper of grass bowing in the breeze. Out here there were no roads, no distant hum of cars, no rooftops peeking above the horizon. Only emptiness, wrapped in twilight. Jasper barked once, sharp and urgent, before disappearing into a tangle of waist-high grass near the center of the field. The man's heart picked up its pace. There was no path here, no reason to be this deep in, yet something inside him, something nameless and strange, compelled him forward. He thought of the stories his father used to tell him about this place, how the field had been there for generations, how his grandfather had played there as a boy too. It was land that belonged to no one and everyone, a space where time folded in on itself. The memory came unbidden, his father's hand ruffling his hair, the sound of cicadas, the feeling of being utterly safe. He hadn't thought about that summer in years, and yet now, standing here, he could almost feel it pressing against him like a ghost. Ahead, Jasper barked again, insistent this time. The man picked up speed, his boots squelching slightly in damp soil. The field opened wide before him until at last he saw it, the lone oak tree that stood crooked and defiant at the heart of the field. Its trunk was massive, scarred with deep grooves and old carvings etched by idle hands long gone. He remembered it well. That tree had been their meeting place. He and his father had once tied a rope swing to its highest branch, laughing as it carried them out over the grass like they were flying. Jasper stood at its base, tail low, pawing at the earth. The man slowed to a walk, his breath ragged from the chase. His heart thudded, not from exertion, but from something heavier. He crouched beside Jasper, brushing his fingers over the disturbed patch of soil. The grass here was pressed flat in an oval, almost as if someone had lain there recently. He frowned. This field hadn't been touched in decades, he was sure of it. His fingertips grazed over the dirt, cool and damp, until they struck something solid. He froze. Jasper whined softly and nosed at the ground. With hands that trembled more than he'd like to admit, the man began to dig. He clawed at the soil, tearing it away in clumps, until the edge of something metallic broke free from the dirt. A tin box, he stared. Its surface was dulled with rust, edges mottled and rough, but the shape was unmistakable. He swallowed hard. He remembered this box. Summer of 1997. He was 9 years old, kneeling beside his father under this very tree, cradling a tin box filled with treasures, cheap trinkets, a baseball card, and a note he'd written promising he'd come back one day. His father had smiled, holding his own note, and told him that memories could live in the ground if you buried them deep enough. The man's throat tightened painfully. His father had died just a year later. He should have forgotten about this box. Most people would. But here it was, as if Jasper had led him straight to it. He pulled it free, dirt cascading from its edges, and knelt in the shadow of the oak tree. For a long moment he simply stared at it. His breath came shallow, uneven, mingled with the sound of the breeze through the grass. He thumbed the latch. It stuck for a moment, groaning with age, but finally gave way. The lid creaked open. Inside was exactly what he remembered, and something he didn't. Yellowed scraps of paper, a baseball card. A friendship bracelet he hadn't seen in decades, his own childish scrawl on folded notes. but beneath them lay a small stack of Polaroids bound with twine, weathered at the edges but intact. He hesitated, fingers trembling as he pulled them free. The first photo made his breath hitch. It was him, no older than 10, standing beside his father near the same oak tree. They were grinning ear to ear, sunburned and carefree, but the date scrawled at the bottom froze his blood. June 2001. 3 years after his father's funeral. His vision blurred, the world tilted, silent but for the thudding of his pulse. His knees felt unsteady, the cool weight of the photograph burning in his hand. He flipped through the others, each one the same. Him and his father, laughing, fishing, sitting beneath this tree. All of them dated years after his father was gone. Jasper pressed against his side, whining softly, as if sensing his distress. The man barely noticed. His hands dug deeper into the box until they found a single envelope, yellowed with age, his name scrawled across it in familiar handwriting, his father's handwriting. He stared at it, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the wind. And then, with trembling fingers, he opened it. The envelope felt impossibly light in his hands, as though it might vanish if he held it too tightly. He ran his thumb along its brittle edge, the texture of old paper flaking slightly beneath his touch. That handwriting, steady, deliberate, was one he could never forget. He hadn't seen it in over 20 years, yet here it was, as vivid as if his father had written it yesterday. The wind stirred the grass around him, carrying with it the distant scent of rain and sun-warmed earth. Jasper sat close, his flank pressed against his knee, as if offering silent reassurance. The man drew a sharp breath, slid his finger under the seal and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded neatly in thirds. He unfolded it with trembling hands. The ink had faded slightly, but every word was unmistakable. If you're reading this, it means you found the box. And if you found the box, it means Jasper led you here. Not the same Jasper you know now, of course. Dogs don't live that long, but I hoped you'd name him that way. I always imagined you would. He blinked. His breath caught painfully in his chest. I know how impossible this sounds, but I need you to believe me. Time doesn't move the same way out here in this field. I didn't believe it either, not until I saw it with my own eyes. This place holds memories, not just ours, but everyone's, buried deep, waiting to be found. His eyes darted across the lines faster and faster. The words felt surreal, impossible, yet there was no mistaking their origin. It was his father's voice in his head, calm, patient, steady. If you walk far enough, you'll see things you don't remember yet. You'll see pieces of your life that never happened, or maybe haven't happened yet. It's not a trick, it's a gift, a chance to hold on to what matters even after it's gone. He lowered the page slightly, glancing around at the vast expanse of swaying grass. The breeze felt colder now, sharper against his skin. The oak tree loomed overhead like a sentinel, its gnarled branches creaking faintly in the wind. I buried those photos because I knew you'd need them someday. When the weight of missing me gets too heavy, I want you to know I'm still here in a way. Not gone, not really. You'll see me again, just follow Jasper. He'll know where to go. The man swallowed hard, his throat raw, eyes burning. The page blurred as tears threatened to spill. And when you're ready, son, keep walking. There's more to find. It ended there. No signature, no goodbye, just that quiet invitation to follow. He stared at the words until they swam before his eyes. His pulse hammered, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence of the field. He read the letter again and again, hoping the meaning would change, that it would ground itself in reality. But it didn't. Jasper nudged his arm gently, breaking his trance. The dog barked once, softly, then turned and padded a few steps toward the far side of the field. It stopped, glanced back, tail wagging faintly, as if waiting for him to follow. His hands shook as he stuffed the letter back into the envelope and tucked it into his jacket. His legs felt unsteady when he rose, brushing dirt from his jeans. The sun was sinking fast, spilling long shadows across the grass, painting everything in gold and deep violet. The field stretched endlessly ahead, and for the first time in decades, it felt alive. Jasper barked again. He hesitated only a moment longer before following. They walked deeper into the field, away from the oak tree and the buried box. The air seemed to grow thicker the farther they went, the breeze dying down until it was oppressively still. The tall grass parted reluctantly at Jasper's steps, closing again behind them like a curtain. He glanced over his shoulder. The oak tree was already distant, its shape distorted by distance and the dusky haze settling over the land. There was no sign of the town, no sound of anything beyond the steady rhythm of Jasper's paws and his own heartbeat. The field felt infinite now. He glanced down at his dog, who trotted confidently forward as though it knew every inch of this place. They passed patches of flowers, wild daisies, clover, lavender, that hadn't been there moments ago. The air smelled sweeter, almost dreamlike, tinged with something he couldn't name. And then he saw it. Far ahead, nestled low in the grass, stood a wooden fence post, splintered, weathered, and half collapsed. Beyond it, he spotted the faint outline of what looked like an old shed, its roof sagging, walls leaning precariously to one side. He froze. He knew that shed. It had stood in his grandparents' backyard when he was a boy. He hadn't seen it since he was 7, when the house was sold and torn down. Yet here it was, impossibly whole and familiar, standing in the middle of this forgotten field. Jasper ran ahead, tail high, disappearing behind the structure. The man followed, each step slower than the last, his heart pounding louder with every footfall. He rounded the corner and stopped dead. The shed door creaked open slowly on its own, as though beckoning him inside. The door swung wider with a groan, hinges straining against years of imagined neglect. The sound split the silence like a knife, and for a moment, the man simply stood there, heart thundering in his chest. The shed was exactly as he remembered it, splintered wood, chipped paint, that same crooked roof. Every inch was burned into his memory from childhood, from afternoons spent playing hide-and-seek in its shadows while his grandparents watched from their porch. But that porch didn't exist anymore, neither did the house. The whole property had been leveled and paved over decades ago, and yet here it was. Jasper barked once, sharp and eager, tail wagging as he darted through the open doorway. The man hesitated, fingers curling into fists at his sides. He could feel the paper of his father's letter pressing against his chest from the pocket where he'd tucked it, as if urging him forward. He stepped inside. The smell hit him instantly, a mixture of old cedar wood, rusted metal, and faint, lingering traces of motor oil. It was exactly as it had been all those years ago. Dust motes hung in the stale air, catching the fading light streaming through cracks in the warped walls. His breath caught. Against the far wall, perched on a wooden shelf, sat a red tackle box he hadn't seen since he was a boy. His father used to bring it on every fishing trip. The sight of it was like a punch to the chest, sharp and sudden, pulling him back into a memory so vivid he swore he could feel the sunburn on his skin and hear the slap of water against the lake's edge. He reached out with trembling fingers, brushing away a thick layer of dust. His hand lingered there for a moment before he flipped it open. Inside were the same lures and hooks he remembered, tiny bits of metal and colored plastic, arranged just as his father had left them. Tucked into the lid, faded but intact, was a photograph, his father holding up a freshly caught fish, grinning wide, his arms slung around a younger version of himself. The date in the corner stopped him cold. 2003. His father had been gone for 5 years by then. The edges of his vision blurred. He sank down onto an overturned crate, clutching the photo tightly in both hands. His breath came uneven, a tremor running through him as his mind raced. This isn't real. It can't be real. Jasper nudged him, resting his head against the man's knee, eyes warm and steady. That simple contact grounded him enough to keep reading the letter's words in his mind. Time doesn't move the same way out here. You'll see things you don't remember yet. He glanced around the shed again. Something had changed. A faint glow, almost imperceptible at first, shimmered in the back corner of the room. He rose slowly, tucking the photograph into his pocket as he moved closer. The glow wasn't a light in the usual sense. It was softer, hazier, like sunlight diffused through fog. It emanated from a seam in the wall where 2 warped planks had shifted apart. He crouched and peered through the gap. Beyond it was impossible. He didn't see grass or dirt or the fading dusk outside. Instead, he saw a lake, still and glassy, mirroring a cloudless summer sky. He smelled water, damp earth, the sharp tang of pine trees, and there, sitting at the edge of a wooden dock that shouldn't exist, was a man, his father. The sight stole his breath. His father sat just as he remembered him, broad shoulders relaxed, cap tilted low, a fishing pole in hand. He was older than in the Polaroids, but younger than he'd been when he died, caught somewhere in between. The man staggered back, heart pounding so violently it hurt. He blinked hard, expecting the vision to vanish, but it didn't. The glow held steady, and with it, the impossible view of that dock, that lake, that man. Jasper barked softly, tail wagging as he padded toward the glow, his body slipping easily between the planks. The man stared, torn between terror and yearning. His father turned slightly on the dock then, as if he'd heard something. He lifted his head, and even across that impossible distance, their eyes met. A slow smile spread across his father's face. He raised his hand in a small wave. "Dad," the man whispered, though no sound carried beyond the shed. His chest constricted painfully. Every instinct screamed at him to step back, to run. But his legs moved forward instead, drawn toward the glow like a tide he couldn't fight. He crouched low, fingers pressing against the warped wood. The gap was just wide enough. He took a deep breath, heart trembling in his chest, and reached forward. The tips of his fingers brushed the light, and suddenly the air shifted. The shed vanished. The grass vanished. He was standing barefoot on that dock, warm wood beneath his feet, the lake stretching endlessly before him, and his father was only a few feet away. The warmth of the wooden planks seeped into his bare feet as he stood frozen on the dock. The air smelled exactly as it had in his youth: crisp water, damp pine, and that faint sweetness of summer wildflowers carried from the shore. A gentle breeze brushed against his face, warm and soft, carrying with it a stillness that felt both real and dreamlike. He looked down at himself, startled to find that his jeans and boots were gone, replaced by the faded shorts and t-shirt he used to wear as a boy. His hands, once weathered by age and time, now seemed younger, stronger. His breath caught as he turned toward the figure seated at the end of the dock. His father. He sat cross-legged, fishing pole in hand, line trailing lazily into the mirror-still lake. His shoulders looked broader than in his later years, his posture easy and relaxed, untouched by illness or age. A baseball cap shaded his face, but there was no mistaking him. The man's throat tightened painfully. "Dad," he whispered, though it came out hoarse, swallowed instantly by the quiet air. His father turned his head slightly, smiling that same gentle, familiar smile, the one that used to greet him at the door after long school days. He didn't speak. Instead, he patted the space beside him on the dock, an invitation as natural as breathing. Jasper bounded forward first, tail wagging, leaping effortlessly onto the dock with a happy bark before settling down at his father's side. The dog's tongue lolled lazily, as if nothing about this was unusual, as if he'd been here before. The man followed slowly, each step forward feeling heavier and lighter all at once, as though gravity itself had shifted. He lowered himself down beside his father, knees folding easily beneath him. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He was afraid that if he blinked too long, this vision would vanish like smoke. He looked at his father's hands, steady, sure, the hands that had taught him how to tie fishing knots, how to throw a bowl, how to steady a bike when he wobbled too much. The lake rippled gently in front of them, though there was no breeze strong enough to disturb its surface. Birds called faintly in the distance, their songs threaded with the sound of lapping water against the dock's edge. His father didn't speak, and yet there was no awkwardness in the silence. It was the silence of familiarity, of being utterly at peace in the company of someone you've missed so deeply you'd forgotten what it felt like to be whole. After what felt like an eternity, his father reached into a small tin box at his side, the same tackle box from the shed, and handed over a fishing pole. The man took it wordlessly, fingers brushing briefly against his father's. The contact was warm, solid, alive. He inhaled sharply, fighting the sting in his eyes. They cast their lines together. The hooks arced in unison, cutting through the air before plopping into the lake with two soft splashes. Ripples fanned outward, concentric and perfect. The man stared at the water, his reflection shimmering faintly beside his father's. His heart ached, but not entirely from sadness. There was something else now, relief, maybe, or the fragile, impossible joy of sitting in a moment you thought you'd lost forever. And then his father finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, and exactly as it had been. "You found it." The man froze. His head turned slowly, locking onto his father's face. "I told you this place held memories," his father continued, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You just had to be ready to see them." The man swallowed hard. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. How is this possible?" His father smiled faintly but didn't look at him. "Some places remember for us. This field, this lake, they hold on to the things we can't." The words sank deep, settling in his chest like stones. "You've been carrying me with you all these years, son. That's why you're here now." His father turned his head then, meeting his eyes. His gaze was warm, proud, and steady, the kind of look that cut through every wall he'd built over the years. "And there's more for you to see, but only if you keep going." Jasper barked once, tail thumping gently against the dock as if agreeing. The man's breath came shallow and quick. More, his father nodded toward the far end of the dock, and when he looked there he saw it, a faint path of stepping stones leading across the water toward the opposite shore. They glimmered faintly in the sunlight, as if waiting. His father's voice was softer now but resolute. "When you're ready, take the path. Jasper will lead the way." The man's grip on the fishing pole tightened. He didn't want to move. He didn't want to lose this moment, the warmth of his father's presence, the smell of the lake, the sound of the water gently lapping against wood. He'd spent so long wishing for this, and now that it was here, how could he ever leave? But his father reached out and placed a firm hand on his shoulder, that same familiar weight, grounding and sure. "I'll see you again," he said simply, "but it's not my turn to walk with you anymore." The man felt tears sting his eyes. He blinked hard, forcing them back, memorizing every line of his father's face, every sound of this impossible day. Jasper stood, wagging his tail, padding toward the first glowing stone. He looked back expectantly. The man hesitated one last moment, staring at his father, then nodded. His father smiled one final time, that proud, steady smile that seemed to say everything words couldn't. He rose, heart heavy and light all at once, and stepped toward the stones. The moment his foot touched the first one, the dock vanished. The first stone was warm beneath his bare foot, pulsing faintly as though it were alive. He steadied himself, gazing at the next one, just a few feet ahead, glowing faintly against the still surface of the lake. The water was so clear it seemed to vanish beneath the glow, reflecting only endless sky. Jasper bounded lightly from stone to stone, pausing halfway to glance back at him, tail wagging in quiet encouragement. The man swallowed hard, heart racing as he stepped forward. Each stone hummed faintly when his weight settled upon it, sending a ripple of energy up through his legs, as if acknowledging him. Behind him, the dock and his father were fading from view, swallowed by a curtain of shimmering haze. He looked back one last time. His father stood where he'd left him, a silhouette framed in sunlight, still smiling. And then, like mist dissolving in the morning sun, he was gone. The man clenched his fists, forcing himself forward, one step, another. The stones stretched out ahead of him in a perfect arc, leading toward the distant opposite shore, where the grass gleamed brighter than gold, and a single familiar figure waited. As he drew closer, he realized it was himself. A boy, no more than 7 or 8, barefoot and freckle-faced, sitting cross-legged at the edge of the glowing shoreline. His younger self was holding something, an old leather-bound journal he remembered losing years ago. The sight made his breath catch. He stepped onto the final stone and felt the air shift again. The lake dissolved beneath him, replaced by tall summer grass and the hum of cicadas. Warmth enveloped him like a blanket, and he realized he was standing in a wide meadow he hadn't seen since childhood, the kind that existed only in hazy fragments of memory. Jasper barked happily, bounding through the grass toward the boy. The child looked up, squinting in the sunlight, then grinned wide. The man felt rooted to the spot. This was him, not just a vision. He could see every detail perfectly. The chipped tooth, the scabbed knees from climbing trees, the sun-bleached hair sticking in all directions. The boy spoke not in words he could hear, but in a voice that echoed inside his head, warm and familiar. "You came back." His chest tightened painfully. He stopped, glancing down at his trembling hands. "How is this happening?" The boy tilted his head, as if amused by the question. He held up the leather journal. "You left this here for yourself," the voice echoed. "You wrote everything down so you wouldn't forget." The man stepped forward cautiously, kneeling down as the boy placed the journal in his hands. Its cover was cracked and weathered, the spine fraying, but it was unmistakably his own. He opened it slowly, and the scent of old paper rose up to meet him. Inside were pages upon pages of drawings, crooked handwriting, and small pressed flowers from summers long past. He flipped through sketches of the oak tree, of Jasper as a puppy, of his father's smiling face. But near the middle, the entries changed. Dates began to appear, dates that hadn't happened yet when he was that age, even beyond. He stared at one in particular, written in his own adult handwriting. "When you feel like you've lost everything, come here, follow Jasper. This place remembers what you can't." The words blurred as tears welled in his eyes. His younger self smiled knowingly, as though he understood what those words meant even before he did. The boy stood suddenly, pointing past him. The man turned. There, at the far end of the meadow, stood a wooden gate he didn't remember, a rustic archway covered in climbing ivy and wild roses. Beyond it lay a path of light, glowing faintly like the stones across the lake. Jasper trotted toward it without hesitation, pausing only to glance back at him. The boy's voice echoed in his head one last time. "This is where you go next." The man's hands tightened around the journal. He looked down at his younger self, wanting to stay, to hold onto this piece of innocence forever. But when he reached out, the boy was already fading, dissolving into warm sunlight until only the field remained. Jasper barked once, sharper this time. The man straightened, tucked the journal under his arm, and stepped toward the gate. As he passed beneath the archway, the air shimmered, and suddenly he was standing in a street lined with houses, familiar houses, with mailboxes he remembered from his youth. Children played in driveways. A sprinkler arched lazily over a freshly mowed lawn. It was his old neighborhood, and walking toward him, smiling as though no time had passed, was someone he hadn't seen since childhood. He stood frozen at the edge of the familiar street, his breath catching in his throat. The neighborhood was exactly as it had been when he was a boy. The cracked sidewalks chalked with bright doodles, the scent of freshly cut grass and hot pavement rising in the summer heat, and the faint sound of wind chimes swaying lazily in the distance. And walking toward him, barefoot and grinning ear to ear, was Evan Miller, his best friend from childhood, the boy he hadn't seen since he was 11, before Evan's family moved halfway across the country. They promised to stay in touch, but letters faded, numbers changed, and life had pulled them apart as it so often did. But here he was. Evan looked exactly as he remembered, sun-streaked hair sticking up in every direction, grass-stained knees, that old red baseball cap turned backward. He carried a battered football under one arm, his smile impossibly wide. "Evan," the man's voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. Evan didn't answer in words. Instead, he tossed the football gently toward him. Instinct took over, and he caught it in both hands, feeling the worn leather, the scuffed laces beneath his fingers. The weight of it was so real it made his chest ache. Evan laughed, that same carefree sound that once filled endless summer afternoons. He motioned for him to follow, jogging backward down the sidewalk with easy strides. Jasper bounded past him, tail wagging as he chased after Evan, barking playfully like he understood this game perfectly. He hesitated only a moment longer before moving forward, each step pulling him deeper into a flood of memories. Biking through these same streets, trading baseball cards on porches, the scent of barbecues wafting from open garages, the endless possibility that only childhood summers carried. Evan darted into the cul-de-sac, spinning suddenly and gesturing toward the empty street. His voice carried now, clear and sharp as if pulled straight from the past. "Come on, one more game." The man blinked hard, his chest tightening. His voice felt caught in his throat, but his feet carried him forward anyway. They tossed the football back and forth, just as they once had, easy, rhythmic, the world narrowing down to the simple exchange of laughter and leather flying through warm evening air. It felt endless, suspended in a perfect bubble of time where nothing else mattered, until Evan suddenly stopped. He stood at the edge of the cul-de-sac now, his form shimmering faintly at the edges as though sunlight was burning him away. His smile softened, his voice quieter now but no less warm. "You always said you'd come back here." The man swallowed hard. "I didn't think I could." "You can, you did." Evan's gaze shifted, nodding toward the far end of the street. The man turned. At the end of the block, where memory should have placed only an old chain-link fence, there now stood another gate, taller this time, wrought iron entwined with ivy, glowing faintly in the dimming light. "Jasper knows where it goes," Evan said, his voice growing fainter. "Go on." The man's breath came fast and shallow. Wanted to speak, to beg this moment to last longer. But when he turned back, Evan was already dissolving, his form fading into soft sunlight until only the empty street remained. Jasper barked once, breaking the silence. The man clutched the football tighter for a moment before setting it gently on the grass. His legs felt heavy as he approached the iron gate, each step echoing in the quiet suburban street. The closer he drew, the stronger the glow became, until it enveloped him completely. He passed through, and suddenly he was no longer in his old neighborhood. He was standing in a hospital corridor. The smell hit him first, antiseptic and sterile, sharp and cold. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, reflecting off polished linoleum floors. Down the hall, muted voices murmured from behind closed doors. Jasper stood ahead of him, tail low now, ears pricked forward, and at the far end of the corridor, seated on a plastic chair beneath a buzzing light, was his mother. She was younger here, her hair still dark, her face softer, unlined by the years of grief that had followed his father's death. She looked up from her hands, eyes widening when she saw him, and in that instant the years fell away. Her face lit up with that same warmth he hadn't seen since childhood, the kind of smile that could quiet every fear, even when the world felt impossibly heavy. For a moment, he was no longer a grown man standing in an impossible dreamscape. He was a boy again, rushing down a sterile hallway toward the woman who'd once been his anchor. He moved without thinking, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. Jasper trotted beside him, tail wagging low and slow, ears pricked forward as if he too recognized her. "Mom," the word cracked from his throat, trembling and uncertain, but when he reached her she rose effortlessly, folding him into her arms. The smell of her perfume hit him instantly, soft lilac, faint but unmistakable, the scent that had lingered in his memory long after her passing. He buried his face against her shoulder, and for a moment the years dissolved entirely. She held him tightly, one hand smoothing his hair in that old comforting rhythm. "You came back," she murmured, her voice low but steady, tinged with that knowing tone mothers always seem to have. He stepped back slightly, blinking through tears, drinking in every detail, the faint laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her hair curled naturally at her shoulders, the warmth radiating from her touch. She looked younger than the last time he'd seen her, vibrant, full of life. "Mom," he said again, his voice barely more than a whisper, "how is this real?" She smiled faintly, her gaze deep and patient, as if she'd been waiting for him to ask. "You followed Jasper." He glanced down at the dog, who sat obediently between them, tail brushing softly against the floor. Jasper's amber eyes met his, steady and knowing, before shifting toward the far end of the corridor. "Mom, I don't understand any of this," he admitted, his hands trembling as he gripped hers. She tilted her head, her smile softening. "Some places hold on to love, even after everything else fades. This field, this path, it's not about understanding, it's about remembering." Her words settled over him like a blanket, warm but heavy. "Why now?" His voice cracked. "Why after all these years?" She cupped his cheek gently, thumb brushing away a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. "Because you needed it now. You've carried so much for so long. This place knew it was time to bring you back to what you'd lost." The corridor seemed to hum faintly around them, the sterile white walls blurring at the edges, as though the world itself were gently dissolving. His mother glanced past him, toward Jasper, and nodded softly. "It's time for you to keep going, sweetheart." "No," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't leave yet. Please, just a little longer." She smiled, that sad, tender smile that parents wear when they know something their child doesn't. "I'm not really gone," she whispered. "Not as long as you carry me with you." Jasper barked quietly, a low, soft sound that echoed strangely in the corridor. His mother leaned forward and kissed his forehead, just as she had countless times when he was small. The warmth of it seared into him, sharp and sweet all at once. When she pulled back, her outline was already shimmering faintly, glowing softly at the edges like sunlight through thin curtains. He reached out for her hands, but she gently guided them down. "Follow Jasper," she said once more. "He knows the way." Tears blurred his vision as he nodded. He wanted to memorize her, every line of her face, every shift in her voice, the way her eyes seemed to hold both comfort and goodbye at once. He turned reluctantly, Jasper now standing ready at the far end of the corridor, where a doorway pulsed faintly with light. When he looked back, his mother was gone. He stood still for a moment, staring at the empty chair where she'd been, his chest aching. Then slowly he stepped forward. Jasper padded ahead, nails clicking lightly on the polished floor, guiding him toward the glowing doorway. His fingers brushed the journal still tucked beneath his arm, grounding him in the reality or unreality of this strange journey. As he crossed the threshold, the hospital smell vanished instantly, replaced by something warm and sharp. The world shifted. He stood suddenly in the middle of a familiar kitchen, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains, the smell of fresh-baked bread hanging thick in the air. And at the counter, apron tied neatly around her waist, stood his grandmother. The scent hit him first, warm, yeasty bread straight from the oven, mingled with the faint sweetness of honey and butter melting on the counter. Sunlight spilled across the checkered linoleum floor, filtered through the familiar lace curtains that danced lightly in the breeze. For a moment, he just stood there, frozen, his breath caught in his throat. The kitchen was exactly as it had been when he was a child. The same pale yellow walls, the same chipped ceramic sink. Even the old brass clock above the stove ticked steadily, its hands locked on 11:47 a.m., just as it always seemed to on lazy Sunday mornings. and there she was. His grandmother. She stood at the counter, her sturdy hands kneading dough with practiced rhythm, humming softly under her breath. Her apron was dusted with flour, and a few stray strands of gray hair had slipped loose from the neat bun she always wore. She looked just as he remembered, not the frail figure he'd seen near the end, but vibrant and alive, the way she was when she'd ruled the kitchen like her own little kingdom. His voice caught before it could even form. "Grandma," she turned at the sound, her warm brown eyes lighting up with recognition that cut straight to his heart. Her face softened into that familiar smile, the one that made the world feel safe and steady no matter how small or scared he'd been. "Oh, there you are," she said, her voice rich and steady, tinged with that no-nonsense tone that had once kept him in line. "Well, don't just stand there looking lost. Wash your hands. Bread's almost ready." He blinked, struggling to speak. I can't believe—" "Hands," she interrupted, pointing toward the sink with the same gentle authority that had governed his childhood. He laughed through a choked breath, half sob, half disbelief. His legs moved automatically, carrying him to the sink, where warm water cascaded over his hands. Jasper followed, curling up near the doorway as if he belonged there, tail sweeping across the floor. As he dried his hands on the old checkered towel, his eyes roamed every corner of the room. The details overwhelmed him: the glass jar of wooden spoons, the small chipped teacup filled with coins by the window, the faded photograph of his grandfather smiling from its spot on the fridge door. Time hadn't touched any of it. His grandmother slid the loaf from the oven, its crust perfectly browned, the smell so vivid it almost made him dizzy. She cut thick slices, steam curling into the sunlit air, and handed him one with a generous pat of butter melting across the surface. He took it, hands trembling slightly. The first bite was everything he remembered, soft, warm, rich with nostalgia. Tears prickled in his eyes as he chewed slowly, savoring it like a sacred ritual. She watched him fondly, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've gotten taller," she said, as though he'd simply aged a few summers, not decades. "Your shoulders are broader too, just like your father's were at your age." Her words hit him like a gentle ache, stirring that raw mix of love and longing that this journey had unearthed again and again. He swallowed hard. "I've missed you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know." Her tone was calm, steady, the way it always had been when life felt too big for him. She reached out, cupping his cheek with her warm, flour-dusted hand. "But I've been here all along, waiting." The hum of the room deepened, a low vibration just beneath hearing, like the world itself was holding its breath. Jasper's ears pricked, and he stood, trotting to a door that hadn't been there before. It stood at the far end of the kitchen, an arched wooden door framed in ivy, glowing faintly as though sunlight poured from the other side. His grandmother followed his gaze. "That's your next step," she said softly. He shook his head, panic rising in his chest. "I can't leave, not yet, please, just a little longer." Her smile was patient, full of knowing. "Oh, sweetheart, I'll always be right here every time you remember. But there's something you still need to see, something waiting for you beyond that door." His hands curled into fists, torn between the ache of staying and the pull of moving forward. "What is it?" She only smoothed his hair with that same comforting gesture she'd used when he was small. "You'll know when you see it." Jasper barked softly, urging him forward. The glow from the door intensified, spilling across the linoleum floor like golden threads. He turned to his grandmother one last time. Her face was calm, serene, almost radiant in the sunlight. He wanted to memorize her like this forever, her strong hands, her kind eyes, her unshakable steadiness. "I love you," he said, voice trembling. She smiled, cupping his cheek once more. "I know, now go." With trembling steps, he moved toward the glowing door. Jasper waited patiently beside it, tail swishing softly. He placed his hand on the old brass knob, its warmth almost startling, and glanced back one final time. She gave him a small nod, her expression a mixture of pride and farewell, and then he opened the door. The kitchen vanished in a rush of light and warmth. He stepped into a wide open field, brighter and greener than any he'd seen before. Wildflowers stretched in every direction, their colors impossibly vivid, lavender, gold, crimson. The sky arched high and endless above, painted in hues of dawn. And in the distance, beneath a solitary tree, stood a figure he hadn't dared dream of seeing again. The field stretched endlessly, a sea of wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. Their scent was thick and sweet, honeysuckle, lavender, and fresh grass mingling in the air, grounding him in this impossible reality. Above, the sky blazed in soft pastels, pinks melting into golds, as if dawn had just broken across an eternal horizon. And there, under the solitary tree, stood a figure. The closer he walked, the clearer they became. A woman, tall and graceful, her hair catching the light in a familiar way that made his chest ache. He knew her silhouette even from a distance. It was Claire, his first love. The girl he'd met in high school, who'd stayed in his life through college, who had once felt like his entire future until circumstance and distance had torn them apart. They hadn't spoken in over 20 years, their lives branching in different directions. And yet here she was, standing in this surreal meadow, barefoot in the grass, smiling at him like no time had passed at all. Jasper trotted ahead, tail wagging joyfully, as though he too recognized her. The dog bounded up to Claire, who bent down to scratch behind his ears before straightening again, her gaze fixed squarely on him. He froze several feet away, words lodged in his throat. Claire, her smile softened, her eyes, those same bright, knowing eyes, catching his and holding them. "You came," she said, her voice warm, lilting in that way he remembered, carrying easily on the breeze. He blinked rapidly, unable to stop the flood of memories, their first date under the stars, late-night drives with music too loud, the promise they'd made when they were young and naive. Forever, no matter what. And yet forever had slipped through their fingers. He took a step forward. "How are you here?" She tilted her head slightly, as if amused by his disbelief. "I've always been here. Just had to remember where to look." Her words sank into him, unsettling and comforting all at once. He closed the distance between them, his breath trembling. Standing this close, he could see every detail, the way sunlight brushed across her cheekbones, the faint freckles he'd once traced with his fingertips. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered. "You did," she replied gently, "but not here, not in this place." He reached out, hesitant, his fingers brushing against her hand. She was warm. Real, his heart clenched painfully in his chest. "Why now?" His voice cracked. "Why would I see you now?" Claire's gaze softened. "Because you needed to, because there's a part of you that still carries us. The field, it doesn't just show you what you've lost, it shows you what shaped you." "What mattered?" He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "We were kids, we didn't know what we were doing." Her smile widened faintly. "Maybe, but it was real, wasn't it?" He couldn't speak, he simply nodded. Jasper lay down at their feet, his tail sweeping lazily through the grass. The dog seemed utterly at peace here, as though this memory was as much his as it was theirs. Claire stepped closer, pressing her palm lightly against his chest. "You've carried so much for so long," she said softly. "It's time to let go of the weight and hold on to the warmth." He closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the scent of wildflowers, the warmth of her hand, the sound of her voice, a perfect harmony of memory and longing. When he opened them again, he saw her glance toward the tree, its branches stretched wide, leaves shimmering faintly with an unnatural glow. Beneath it, he noticed something he hadn't before. A small wooden bench, carved with initials he instantly recognized, his and hers, etched deep into the grain. He let out a shaky laugh. "We carved that the summer before you left, and now it's still here," she said, guiding him toward it. They sat together beneath the tree, the bench creaking softly under their weight. For a while neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, rich with everything they didn't need to say aloud. He thought of their last night together, of promises they couldn't keep. He remembered how the world had felt too big then, how they'd both believed love could conquer anything. And sitting here, it almost felt like it could again. After what felt like forever and no time at all, she finally turned to him. "It's time," she said gently. His stomach knotted. "Time for what?" She nodded toward a path he hadn't noticed before, narrow, winding, lined with glowing stones that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, leading away from the tree and disappearing into a hazy horizon. "You're not done," she said, her voice tender but resolute. "There's one more place you need to go." He shook his head, panic rising. "I don't want to leave, not again." Her smile was sad but knowing. "You don't lose me by leaving, just like you didn't lose your father or your mother or any of them. We live in here." She touched his chest lightly over his heart. "This is just where you came to remember." He stared at her, memorizing her face all over again, as though etching it deeper into his memory so it would never fade. Jasper rose from the grass, trotting toward the glowing path. He looked back expectantly, his amber eyes steady. Claire reached out, threading her fingers briefly through his one last time. "Go," she whispered. "He's waiting for you." He froze. "Who?" Her gaze softened. "You'll know." His chest tightened painfully. He wanted to hold her longer, say all the things he never had, but before he could speak, she leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss against his cheek. Warmth radiated through him, sharp and sweet, anchoring itself deep inside. When he opened his eyes again, she was already fading, dissolving into the sunlit haze of the meadow. He stood slowly, every muscle trembling, and turned toward the path. Jasper barked once, sharp and clear, before trotting ahead. With one last glance at the empty bench and the tree that had borne their names, he followed the dog onto the glowing stones. As he stepped forward, the meadow blurred, the wildflowers dissolving into light. When the glow cleared, he was standing in a place that made his heart stop cold. It was his childhood bedroom. The air was thick with stillness, the kind that presses against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. He stood frozen in the doorway of his childhood bedroom, staring at a space untouched by time. The walls were painted the same pale blue, plastered with faded posters of baseball players and comic book heroes. The old wooden desk sat beneath the window, cluttered with schoolbooks, pencils worn down to nubs, and a half-built model airplane that had gathered no dust in all these decades. The bed was neatly made, the same checkered quilt his grandmother had stitched by hand draped perfectly across it. Even the smell was the same, a mixture of pencil shavings, sun-warmed fabric, and that faint scent of his mother's laundry soap lingering in the air. It was as if he'd stepped backward through time and landed squarely in an ordinary summer afternoon from 30 years ago. Jasper padded inside ahead of him, tail swishing gently as he sniffed the corners of the room, circling with quiet familiarity before settling down at the foot of the bed. His amber eyes locked onto the door opposite the one they'd entered, a door he didn't remember ever existing, but before he could move toward it, something else caught his attention. There was someone sitting on the bed, a boy, small, slight, and unmistakably him. His younger self sat cross-legged, barefoot, wearing the same striped t-shirt he remembered ruining with grass stains one summer. The boy had a notebook open in his lap, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He looked up slowly, and when their eyes met, the man's chest constricted painfully. The boy smiled faintly. "You came back." The man's throat tightened. I don't understand." The boy tilted his head, studying him. "You always said you would, you promised." He stepped forward hesitantly, glancing around the room again. "I promised a lot of things." "You used to sit right here," the boy said, patting the quilt beside him. "Every night you'd tell yourself stories. About how things would be when you grew up, about what you'd do, who you'd be." The man approached, his legs trembling. He lowered himself onto the bed beside his younger self, the mattress dipping with familiar softness. He stared at the walls, remembering how often he'd gazed at those posters, daydreaming about far-off places and endless futures. "I wanted to be everything," he said softly. "You still can," the boy replied simply, flipping open the notebook. The man leaned closer, seeing his own childhood handwriting sprawled across the pages, lists of dreams, drawings of imagined adventures, even crude sketches of the family dog from back then. His heart twisted sharply. "You wrote this," the boy said. "You wrote it all down so you wouldn't forget. But then you grew up and you left it here." The man swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to forget." "I know." The boy glanced up at him, expression steady. "But that's why you're here now. This place, these memories, they're all the things you buried, the pieces of yourself you left behind." Jasper whined softly, his tail thumping against the floor as if to emphasize the point. The man reached out, brushing his fingers over the pages of the notebook. It was all there, his handwriting, his childish sketches, even the crooked lettering of promises he'd once made to himself. "Why am I seeing this?" he asked quietly. The boy closed the notebook gently, looking him straight in the eye. "Because you forgot who you were." The words hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "You've been carrying so much," the boy continued. "Loss, regret, the things you never said. But this place, it's not just about looking back. It's about remembering what's still here." He glanced down at Jasper, who now stood at the strange second door, tail wagging slowly. The boy nodded toward the dog. "He's ready for you." The man stood reluctantly, staring down at his younger self. "If I go through that door, will I see you again?" The boy smiled faintly. "I'm always with you, you just forget to look sometimes." His throat ached as he bent down slightly, pressing his forehead against his younger self's for a brief, fleeting second. Then he turned away. The door across the room pulsed faintly with warm light, its edges lined with a soft glow. Jasper barked once and trotted toward it expectantly. The man placed his hand on the knob and glanced back one final time. The room was still there, his posters, his desk, his younger self sitting quietly on the bed, watching with calm patience. He opened the door. Light poured out in a flood, wrapping him in warmth. When his vision cleared, he found himself standing in a park. It wasn't just any park. It was the park where he'd buried his first dog. The air was different here, heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and freshly cut grass. He knew this place instantly, even though it had been decades. The wide oak trees, the cracked walking path winding between them, and the small wooden bridge that crossed over a shallow creek, it was all exactly as it had been when he was 12. And at the far edge of the park stood the hill where he'd buried Max, his first dog. He swallowed hard, his chest tightening painfully as memories surged like a tide. That day had been gray and drizzling, the kind of rain that clung to skin and clothes, but even then, he dug into the damp earth with numb hands, refusing to let anyone else do it. He'd pressed Max's favorite ball into the grave with him before covering it over, whispering promises through tears he hadn't understood how to stop. Now the hill looked brighter, the grass vivid and green, as though time had scrubbed it clean of sorrow. And standing there at the top was a shape that made his breath hitch. Max, the golden retriever, stood tall and strong, fur shimmering like sunlight in motion, tail wagging with that familiar, joyous energy. His tongue lolled, ears perked, and for a moment the man was 12 again, his heart soaring at the sight of his best friend bounding toward him. He dropped to his knees instinctively as Max leapt into his arms. The weight was real, solid, warm. He buried his face in the dog's fur, inhaling that old comforting smell, grass, sunshine, and something indefinably Max. "God, I missed you," he murmured, his voice breaking. Max licked his cheek enthusiastically, just as he always had, tail thumping wildly against the ground. Jasper stood nearby, watching quietly, almost reverently, before stepping forward to nuzzle Max in greeting. The two dogs circled each other briefly, tails wagging in some silent language only they understood. The man held Max tightly, tears streaming freely now. For years he'd carried the guilt of that day, the feeling that he'd failed Max somehow by not being there enough at the end, by not knowing how to say goodbye. He had been just a kid, but that grief had stayed lodged deep in his heart, unresolved. Max pulled back slightly, his amber eyes, so much like Jasper's, meeting his own. And though no words passed between them, he felt it, as clear as thought. Forgiveness, love, gratitude. Jasper barked softly, breaking the silence. The man looked up to see that the hill had shifted. At its crest now stood another door, this one larger than any he'd seen before, arched and imposing, framed in carved wood and blooming vines. Its glow was softer this time, but warmer, almost inviting. Max bounded up the hill toward it, pausing halfway to look back. Jasper followed, trotting with his usual steady gait, pausing to glance at him expectantly. He rose slowly, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. His heart ached, but it was different now, less sharp, more full. He climbed the hill, every step heavier with memory, of days spent running here with Max, of laughter and scraped knees, of summers that had seemed to stretch forever. And then, finally, he stood at the top, between the two dogs, facing the glowing door. Max pressed against his side, warm and solid, as if lending him strength. Jasper stood tall on the other, amber eyes fixed forward. He reached down instinctively, resting a hand on each dog's head. The door loomed before him, etched with intricate carvings, a tree, a swing, a lake, images from the memories he'd walked through, woven together like a map of his life. He glanced between Jasper and Max. "What's on the other side?" he whispered. Neither dog moved, but he felt it, an unspoken urging, gentle but firm. He looked back once, over the park, the creek, the familiar trees. It was all so vivid, so achingly beautiful, but he knew it was only meant to bring him here to this point. Drawing a deep, steadying breath, he reached for the handle. Warmth radiated from it instantly, flowing up his arm and through his chest, a pulse like a heartbeat syncing with his own. He hesitated just once more, glancing down at the dogs. Max wagged his tail and pressed his nose gently to his hand. Jasper barked once, soft, reassuring. He opened the door. Light surged, enveloping everything. For an instant there was no sound, no scent, no feeling but that glowing warmth. When it cleared, he found himself standing in the middle of the field. The same field where it had all begun. The oak tree stood tall at its center, golden light spilling over its branches like dawn breaking anew. Wildflowers danced in the breeze, and there, standing beneath the tree, was a man he recognized instantly, his father, but not as he'd seen him before. This time he wasn't fishing or waving from afar. This time he was waiting, calm, steady, smiling wide, and beside him was something else. a single empty chair. The air was different here, warmer, fuller, like sunlight itself had weight. The oak tree loomed ahead, its branches stretching wide and protective, every leaf shimmering faintly as if alive with memory. Beneath it stood his father, framed by golden light that seemed to bend around him, and beside him rested a single wooden chair carved with intricate details, swirls of leaves, paw prints, and even faint initials he recognized as his own. Jasper padded forward, tail wagging in steady rhythm, while Max trotted happily alongside, his fur gleaming in the sun. The man followed slowly, each step pulling at the deepest threads of his heart. His throat tightened as his father's face became clearer. The strong jaw, the sharp but kind eyes, the easy smile that once anchored his whole world. When he finally reached him, words failed. His father's eyes softened. "You made it," he said simply, his voice steady and warm, the same voice that had once taught him how to throw a ball, tie a knot, ride a bike. The man's breath hitched. I don't understand any of this." His father gestured to the chair. "Sit. You've been carrying this walk a long time." He lowered himself slowly into the seat, feeling the polished wood beneath him. Jasper and Max curled at his feet, pressing close, grounding him. His father remained standing, hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed but purposeful. "You followed Jasper, didn't you?" his father asked. He nodded. "I didn't even know why at first. I just felt like I had to." "That's because he knew," his father said with a faint smile. "Dogs always know. They lead us where we need to go, even when we don't see it ourselves." The man glanced down at Jasper, who met his gaze with calm amber eyes, tail sweeping gently through the grass. His father crouched before him then, bringing them eye to eye. "This field," he said softly, "isn't just a place. It's a tether. It holds pieces of us, the ones we lose, the ones we forget. Every time you loved, every time you laughed, every time you grieved, it all lives here waiting for you to come back." The man's voice trembled. "Why me? Why now?" His father's gaze was steady. "Because you've been carrying too much alone, because you needed to be reminded that you're not." Tears welled hot in his eyes. "I've missed you so much." His father smiled, reaching out to place a solid, warm hand on his shoulder. "I never went anywhere, not really. Every memory, every laugh, every quiet walk in this field were stitched into you. All of us are, your mother, your grandmother, even Max." He looked down at Max, who thumped his tail joyfully in response. The man's chest constricted painfully, but this time it was different, less sharp grief, more the bittersweet ache of reunion. His father straightened and stepped back, nodding toward Jasper. "He's your bridge, the one who brought you here. Every time he nudged you, every time he barked and you followed, it was this place calling you home." The man turned his gaze toward Jasper, suddenly seeing the dog in a new light, not just as his loyal companion, but as the living thread connecting him to every piece of his past. "Jasper led you here because it was time," his father continued. "Time to stop living like you've lost everything and start living like you've carried everything forward." The man's breath trembled, but he nodded slowly, clutching the truth of it in his chest. Then his father gestured gently toward the chair's armrests. Carved there, faint but clear, were dozens of small engravings, initials, dates, and tiny symbols. His heart twisted as he recognized them, his mother's initials, his grandmother's handwriting style, even a tiny carved paw print labeled Max. And there, freshly added, was one more, Jasper. "This chair," his father said, "is yours. It's every memory you've touched, every piece you thought you lost, and every part of you that still lives here." The man ran his fingers over the carvings, feeling each groove like a heartbeat. His tears fell freely now, silent but unrestrained. His father smiled faintly. "There's one more thing." He stepped closer, kneeling again so they were eye level. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "This isn't goodbye." The man blinked hard, confused. "What do you mean?" "Because every time you walk this field, even if only in your heart, you'll find us here, waiting. And someday, when it's truly your turn, Jasper will lead you the rest of the way." Jasper barked once, low and sure, as if affirming the promise. The man reached forward impulsively, embracing his father tightly. For a long moment, they simply held on, no words, no explanations, just the raw, overwhelming comfort of being whole again. When they finally pulled apart, his father gave him a nod, that same proud look he remembered from childhood. "It's time to go back now," he said gently. "Your story is not done yet." The man swallowed hard, glancing down at Jasper, who was already standing, tail wagging faintly, ready to lead him once more. His father's hand squeezed his shoulder one last time. "Remember, son, the field never leaves you. It lives wherever you carry it. The wind rustled through the wildflowers, warm and soft. The light shifted faintly, and he knew it was time. Jasper barked again, trotting toward a glowing path that now extended beyond the oak tree, lined with flowers. Max followed close behind, his golden tail swaying. The man stood slowly, his heart heavy but full. He glanced back one last time at his father, who stood smiling beneath the tree, framed in light. Then he stepped forward, Jasper at his side, toward the final path. The field shimmered, and suddenly he was standing at the edge of it all, right back where he'd first chased Jasper, moments before everything began. The world stilled as the shimmer faded. He stood in the same field where it had all begun, golden grass rippling gently under the late afternoon sun, the oak tree now distant, just a silhouette against the horizon. But something was different. The air smelled richer, alive with wildflowers and rain-soaked soil, and the weight in his chest had shifted. He looked down at Jasper. The dog sat patiently at his feet, tail sweeping slowly through the grass, amber eyes steady and knowing. There was no sign of Max, no glow of doors or paths, no surreal haze, just the quiet, open field. Had it all been a dream? His fingers brushed his pocket instinctively and froze. The envelope was still there. He pulled it out slowly, his breath catching as he unfolded his father's letter. It was exactly as he remembered, creases sharp, ink faded, that unmistakable handwriting steady and deliberate. He glanced around again. Everything looked ordinary now, and yet he knew it was. Jasper barked softly, padding a few steps ahead, then pausing to glance back at him. It was the same bark that had started all of this. The dog wagged his tail once, an unspoken command, follow. He did. Each step felt heavier, but in a grounding way, as though every footfall reconnected him to the earth, to himself, to everything he'd seen. He passed the spot where he'd dug up the tin box, its disturbed soil now neatly covered by the wind-blown grass. The oak tree stood far in the distance, still and unmoving, a sentinel holding silent witness to what had happened beneath its branches. His thoughts swirled, his father's steady voice, his mother's smile in the hospital corridor, his grandmother's kitchen, Claire's kiss beneath the tree, Max's joyful bark, all of it rushing together, a flood of memory and meaning. It was overwhelming but strangely peaceful, as if grief and love had finally learned how to share the same space in his heart. Jasper suddenly stopped ahead, tail wagging, and barked once. The man looked up and saw the boundary of the field, the familiar fence line separating it from the suburban road beyond. The late sun painted the horizon orange, the first hints of evening creeping in. He exhaled slowly, realizing just how far he'd come, both in distance and in ways words could never capture. When he reached the fence, Jasper leapt lightly over it and waited, looking back expectantly. The man climbed over more slowly, pausing at the top. From here he could see the entire field stretched out behind him, endless grass, glowing softly in the fading sunlight, the oak tree barely visible against the far horizon. It looked perfectly ordinary, but he knew better. He climbed down, landing softly in the grass on the other side. Jasper padded closer, pressing against his leg in a rare moment of stillness, his warm presence grounding him even more than the earth beneath his feet. The man crouched, resting his hand on Jasper's head. "You knew, didn't you?" Jasper looked up at him, tongue lolling slightly, tail giving one small wag, as if answering yes in the only language he had. A tear slipped down his cheek, but it wasn't sadness this time. It was something deeper, acceptance, gratitude, even wonder. He stood again, taking one last glance back at the field. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it faint echoes he almost swore he could hear. Laughter, warm voices, the gentle bark of a long-lost dog. For the first time in years, the ache in his chest felt lighter, not gone but no longer crushing. Jasper nudged his leg gently and started toward the road, tail high, pace steady. The man followed, his boots crunching softly on gravel as they reached the quiet stretch of pavement that led back toward town. The world looked the same, trees swaying, birds calling faintly in the distance, but he wasn't the same. He reached into his jacket pocket again and pulled out the old leather journal he'd been given in that glowing meadow. Flipping it open, he found the page dated for the present day, words scrawled in handwriting that matched his own. "Remember, the field lives in you, and whenever you forget, Jasper will remind you where to look." He closed it gently, pressing it to his chest. The walk home was quiet, broken only by the rhythmic sound of Jasper's paws against the pavement and the distant hum of cicadas waking in the warm dusk. As the first stars pricked the sky overhead, he realized something profound. He didn't need to rush back to the field. He didn't need glowing doors or impossible visions to hold on to them anymore. They were with him, in every scent of wildflowers, in every bark of Jasper's voice, in every quiet summer breeze that whispered through the grass. And for the first time in years, he smiled without reservation. The sky deepened into twilight by the time he and Jasper reached the edge of town. Streetlights flickered to life one by one, their soft halos spilling across empty sidewalks. The air was cooler now, tinged with the faint smell of asphalt still warm from the day's sun. Each step felt strange, familiar in its rhythm, but heavy with everything he carried now. Jasper padded faithfully beside him, his tail swaying lazily, ears occasionally twitching toward distant sounds. The dog seemed calm, utterly grounded, as if none of this had been unusual. But for the man, every shadowed corner and quiet street felt different, brighter somehow, infused with a sense of weight and meaning he couldn't quite put into words. When they reached his house, he hesitated at the gate, staring at it with fresh eyes. It was the same small, weathered home he'd walked into countless times before, but tonight it felt like a sanctuary rather than just shelter. He opened the gate slowly, the faint creak of hinges sounding sharper in the still night, and stepped inside with Jasper close on his heels. Inside, the quiet hit him like a wave. No hum of TV, no phone notifications buzzing, just silence. The kind of silence that might have felt lonely before but now seemed peaceful, full of presence rather than absence. He dropped his keys on the counter and hung his jacket, his hand brushing against the folded letter in its pocket. He set it down on the kitchen table carefully, almost reverently. Beside it, he placed the old leather journal. Its cracked spine seemed to glow faintly in the warm kitchen light, as if holding all the weight of what he'd seen. His father by the lake, his mother in that sterile corridor, his grandmother's bread, Claire's kiss beneath the tree, Max's joyful bark. Jasper circled twice on the living room rug before flopping down with a sigh, resting his chin on his paws. His amber eyes tracked him steadily, calm and knowing. The man poured himself a glass of water, his hand steady now, and leaned against the counter, staring quietly at Jasper. "You knew this was what I needed," he said softly. Jasper thumped his tail once against the floor, his gaze unflinching. He carried the glass to the table and sat, opening the journal again. The pages smelled faintly of wildflowers and sun-warmed grass, though he knew that was impossible. He flipped past the entries written in his childhood hand, lists of dreams, clumsy sketches, and stopped at the blank page waiting after the last vision he'd walked through. He picked up a pen and stared at the empty lines for a long time, unsure where to begin. Finally, he wrote, "Today, Jasper led me back to myself." The words flowed after that, steady and certain. He wrote about the field, about the glowing paths and familiar faces. About the smell of his grandmother's kitchen, the sound of his mother's laugh, the impossible sight of Claire beneath that tree. About Max's weight against his chest, the warmth of his father's hand on his shoulder. He wrote until the page was full, then turned to the next and kept going. When he finally set the pen down, his hand ached faintly, but his chest felt lighter. He looked at Jasper, who still lay watching him from the rug. "Come here, boy." Jasper rose immediately and padded over, pressing his head against his knee. The man scratched behind his ears, fingers sinking into that familiar fur. "You brought me back," he whispered, his voice thick but steady. "I don't know how, but you did." Jasper nuzzled closer, his warmth grounding him in a way nothing else could. He rose from the chair and moved to the living room, sinking into the worn couch. Jasper jumped up beside him without hesitation, curling against his side in that easy way dogs always seem to know how to do. The man rested his arm around him, feeling the steady rise and fall of Jasper's breathing, the rhythmic thump of his tail against the cushion. For a long time, they simply sat there. The clock ticked softly on the wall. Outside, a night breeze stirred, carrying faint echoes of summer grass through the open window. His mind wandered, not to regret this time, but to gratitude. Every memory he'd walked through felt sharper now, alive in his chest instead of buried beneath years of silence. His father's words echoed, "The field never leaves you, it lives wherever you carry it." He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. The scent of Jasper's fur mingled with the cool night air, anchoring him. When he opened them again, he reached out and pulled the journal closer from the table. On the next page, he wrote one more line, "Whenever I forget, I'll follow Jasper." Jasper shifted, resting his head in his lap, and the man smiled faintly, his fingers absently stroking the dog's fur. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of it. He looked down at Jasper, who blinked up at him with quiet trust. "Come on," he murmured. "Bedtime." They moved together, a quiet procession down the hall. He paused briefly in the doorway of his bedroom, glancing back at the kitchen table, where the letter and journal sat side by side, bathed in moonlight. It struck him then how seamlessly the past and present had folded together, no longer jagged edges, but a single thread running through everything: love, memory, and the loyal dog who had carried him through it all. Jasper leapt onto the bed first, circling once before settling down at the foot. The man climbed in after him, pulling the quilt tight around his shoulders. He reached down, resting a hand on Jasper's back, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath. As he closed his eyes, he didn't see the darkness of the room. He saw the field, golden grass swaying, the oak tree standing tall, and familiar figures waving in the distance. And for the first time in decades, he felt whole. Morning light filtered softly through the curtains, painting warm streaks across the bedroom wall. He stirred slowly, the remnants of dreams clinging to him, fragments of golden grass, laughter echoing across the wind, and the steady sound of a bark that felt eternal. Jasper lay curled at the foot of the bed, breathing slow and steady, his fur rising and falling like the tide. The man watched him for a long moment, his hand resting gently on the dog's back, feeling the warmth beneath his fingers. For the first time in what felt like years, he woke without heaviness in his chest. The ache that had been a constant shadow was still there, but different now, no longer a void but a fullness, rich with memory rather than loss. He rose quietly, careful not to disturb Jasper, and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The journal sat where he'd left it, beside his father's letter, both bathed in golden morning light. He ran his fingers over the cracked leather cover, flipping it open to the last page he'd written. "Whenever I forget, I'll follow Jasper." He smiled faintly, tracing the words with his thumb. As if sensing his presence, Jasper padded into the kitchen, stretching leisurely before trotting over to sit beside him. The dog's amber eyes met his own, steady and knowing in a way that still unsettled him, like he saw further than he should, deeper than words could reach. "Morning, boy," he said softly, crouching down to scratch behind Jasper's ears. The dog thumped his tail against the floor in response, pressing close. He stood and opened the back door, letting Jasper out into the yard. The morning air was cool, crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and freshly blooming flowers. Jasper bounded out, nose to the ground, tail wagging lazily as he wandered along the fence line. The man stepped onto the porch, leaning against the railing as he watched him. Beyond the yard, past the neighborhood streets and scattered rooftops, he could just make out the distant outline of the field. It was ordinary again, untouched, quiet, its mysteries hidden beneath its calm surface. But he no longer needed to see glowing doors or impossible visions to know what was there. He carried it now, every piece of it, stitched deep inside where it would never fade. He glanced down at Jasper, who had stopped sniffing and now stood still, staring out toward the field. His tail wagged once, slow and deliberate, before he turned back to look at his owner. The man smiled knowingly. "Not today, buddy," he murmured. "We'll go back when it's time." Jasper tilted his head slightly, then trotted over, pressing his weight gently against his leg in silent agreement. They stayed there for a long time, man and dog, watching the sunlight creep higher, spilling warmth across the quiet world. He thought of his father's words, "The field never leaves you. It lives wherever you carry it." He thought of his mother's hands, his grandmother's kitchen, Claire's soft kiss beneath the tree, Max's joyful bark. He thought of the boy he used to be, sitting cross-legged in that old room, dreaming big dreams he'd forgotten how to chase. And he thought of Jasper, loyal, patient Jasper, who had led him through it all. A lump formed in his throat, but it wasn't sadness. It was something else, gratitude so deep it felt like it might spill over. He crouched down beside Jasper, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck, pressing his forehead gently to fur that smelled faintly of grass and sun. "Thank you," he whispered. Jasper exhaled a slow huff of breath, leaning into him, tail swishing softly against the porch. As they stayed like that, silent, steady, two hearts beating in quiet sync, he realized something. The field wasn't just a place. It was every moment of love he'd ever known. Every paw print left in his life, every laugh, every touch, every memory that had shaped him. It wasn't behind him. It was here, living and breathing in the warmth of the dog pressed against his chest, in the sunrise spilling across the world, in the quiet peace that had finally come home to stay. He stood slowly, ruffling Jasper's fur one last time before stepping back inside. The journal still lay open on the table. He picked up his pen and added one final line beneath his last entry. "The field lives in us, always." He closed the journal, placed it beside the letter, and smiled faintly. Jasper trotted in after him, tail wagging, and curled up in his usual spot by the couch. The man sank into his chair, watching him fondly, feeling the kind of calm he'd once thought he'd never find again. Outside, the wind rustled gently through the trees. He could almost hear it, the faintest echo of voices carried on the breeze, laughter woven into the sound of summer grass. He smiled. Tomorrow he and Jasper would walk the field again, not to chase ghosts this time, but to remember, to honor, and to keep carrying it forward. And someday far in the future, when his own time came, he knew Jasper would be there waiting to lead him back to the field, back to everything, forever.
Dogs truly are the most loyal companions in our lives. What did you think of this heartwarming story? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next story of love, loyalty, and the incredible bond we share with our paw-some friends.